David Simon is here. You know him as the creator and executive producer of The Wire. The HBO series won a Peabody Award in 2004. For 5 seasons, it revealed the city of Baltimore with a passionate yet unflinching eye. His latest is Generation Kill, based on the 2004 book by journalist Evan Wright. It tells the story of the Marines' 1st Recon Battalion during the first 7 weeks of the war in Iraq. Here is a look at Generation Kill.
Bro, why aren't they shooting at us?
I am pleased to have David Simon at this table again. Welcome.
Thank you.
How did you do it? Evan Wright was a reporter for Rolling Stone who wrote a book, and he was embedded with them.
Well, we then embedded Evan Wright in our writer's room.
Yes.
Ed,
locked the door.
Ed was in Vietnam. Ed Burns, my partner, writing partner, was in Vietnam with the Army, and I've had no military experience. So we're at least a generation removed from anything, and a division of the military service removed from Generation Kill, and I wouldn't have dared try this without Evan sitting right next to us and saying, no, that's not the way he would say it, or, if they're digging Ranger graves, they would do it this way, or if when they would turn over the engines on the Humvees, they would do it like this. I mean, all that stuff we were rigorous about. And then not only in the writer's room, we had Evan with us for casting, for editing. We kept it involved.
So you casted to look alike?
To some extent. And yet sometimes you just have to take the best actor.
Right.
And some of these guys are reminiscent of the real guys, and sometimes not. But they all are trying to approximate the roles of the real guys in Bravo.
Yeah, how did this come about? Because people are saying, it's gotten, I don't have to tell you, extraordinary praise.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, for the most part, yes, I'm sure that's an exception.
Like anybody else, I know the ones that didn't praise it, and they'll be hunted down.
They have no chance to.
Yeah, nobody ever remembers their good reviews. So only remember your bad reviews.
Okay, so tell me how it came to you. Why is David Simon doing this?
Because a fella at HBO by the name of Carrie Antholis, who was involved in my first project at HBO, which was the adaptation of my own book, The Corner, which I wrote with Ed, he had been involved in making that into a miniseries. And we really were rigorous in that miniseries about having it, we were using the real names of the people in West Baltimore, and I felt an obligation to be true in that project. So they had already bought Evan's articles and then later bought the book, and they were looking for somebody to adapt it. And Carrie, who came out of the documentary division of HBO, he didn't want anybody to mess with the accuracy of the information. He wanted to try to do it to a level of accuracy where we could use the real names of the Marines and of their officers and not take liberties. And so The Corner had been a prototype, I guess, a template for that. And so he came to me with the book. I had not read it when it came out, much to my embarrassment.
You care about authenticity to a large, it's a high standard for you. It was true in Wire, it's true here.
Yeah, it's a fun standard. I enjoy it. I'm not particularly interested in television as a form of entertainment. I was a journalist, and my newspaper went bad, out-of-town ownership, Pulitzer lust, traveling resumes. It was, everybody, and ultimately the buyout started as we're still experiencing in journalism, and it was time to go. But in my head, I was sort of a newspaperman without a newspaper. So I stumbled into television, really stumbled into it, and but some of the same logic applies. I'd rather get it right than get it wrong. And when I was writing narrative as a journalist, I never worried about what the average reader, the so-called average reader, what does he think? I don't care. It's like I want to write. If I'm writing about a homicide detective, I want other homicide detectives who do that job
to say he got it.
This guy, this is our day. This guy got it. Yeah. Same thing with a drug addict or a recovering addict. Same thing with a politician. Same thing with a school teacher. So, and Ed feels the same way. So the trick is then coalescing a group of writers around that logic.
What's the credo of Simon and Burns when they approach a project?
The
I don't want to. I mean, I'm not trying to send you a softball to give you a sense, but I want to know is in your soul and you know what you care about. I mean, it's an interesting idea that you want to make sure the homicide detectives think you got it right. That you got it.
I want the characters to pop as real people. I care about that. And then ultimately, I feel an obligation, if you're doing long form on television, if it's 7 episodes or 12 episodes, if you're asking people to make that commitment to watching 7 or 10 or 12 hours or something, you got to pay it out at the end. You got to pay out story. You got to think about, you know, it's a gift to be given 12 hours on HBO to tell a story with. God help you if you don't have something to say. You know, then you almost shouldn't take the hours.
Yes,
and you
they are too precious.
And you shouldn't keep a show running for the sake of, well, you know, we got to do another season because they're paying us.
Yeah.
When you're out of stories, it's telling you something. It's time to move on, find another story.
Was it time to move on from The Wire?
It was. We had, you know, we could have done other institutions in Baltimore besides the 5 we chose, but at a certain point, the characters would have started repeating themselves. And even if we had more to say about this aspect of Baltimore or that aspect, the device that we had constructed to say it with, that was going to start feeling shop-worn. So, yeah, it was time to move on.
Becoming a caricature of yourself.
Right. I mean, I think, to go back to your question, if we have a credo, it's probably have a take and don't suck. I mean, it's probably as simple as, you know, think about things, look at the evidence, come to a conclusion that's reasonable or that you think is the reasonable conclusion, structure a story around it, and try to do it well. I mean, it's not like I don't think we're any more clever than other people. I think we are just a little bit more devoted to not wasting the chance. You know, there's a lot of TV it's about entertainment. You know, the whole industry is based on money. It's about entertainment. And we're really not supposed to be in TV. We've made a mistake, or they've made a mistake.
But do you find it satisfying now, using pictures the way you can, using character the way you can? And do you think it finds, especially TV because of the long form, gives you, I mean, you found your mother lode.
Yeah, maybe. Although I keep thinking that as soon as this crack pipe that is HBO is knocked from my mouth, I'm gonna have to go back and write another. I mean, I enjoyed writing books. It's
an interesting reference, crack pipe. That's
no, TV. It's hard. I mean, you know, I've signed up for another book with John Sterling, you know, who's my editor on the first 2, and I hope to get that out to him, get a manuscript out next year. But it's hard. It's hard to say no when you see the possibilities, and HBO has been very benign about saying, just, you know, do it the right way, and we'll leave you alone. And that doesn't happen.
Well, but that's because you brought them something. I mean, they have confidence in you.
A little more each time.
Yeah.
A little more each time. You know, I mean, you still have to go into the room and sell and say, this is what I want to do next, and here's why it'll be good. And this time, I think people will really watch it. I'm almost sure.
Probably not the time to talk about what you're going to do next when this is just getting started, but you're going to New Orleans.
Yeah.
What story do you want to tell there?
About the musical culture there, and about the city itself trying to reconstitute itself after Katrina. You know, the great unspoken fear of anyone who knows and loves that city is that it's going to be the Disney version. That a lot of what made New Orleans genuinely brilliant as a source of music and dance and culture and this essential American experience is the dysfunction of the city, is the poverty, is the tragedy that underlies. You know, this is a city that put the fun in funeral. I mean,
well, yes, did that.
I mean,
whose line was that?
It's a bumper sticker down there, but a good one.
It is.
But there's something about it that you know. You look at the Mardi Gras Indians. You look at the whole concept of jazz, the whole of improvisational music. The idea of the New York, you know, the second line rhythm that dominates everything. The idea that you stumble into a parade without even thinking about it, and you end up 35 blocks from where you said you were going that day. That doesn't happen anywhere else in America.
It's a spontaneity we should
all... And it's in danger because, in some ways, a lot of the people that make that happen are still in, you know, Baton Rouge and Houston and
they haven't returned.
Right. I mean, you know, that city's, I think maybe they got 60% of their population, and you know, we've managed to repair the levees back to the retaining walls, I should say, back to the mediocrity they were before the storm. Is
that all there is? They're restored to the mediocrity they had before?
Oh, yeah.
Then they're incredibly vulnerable, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And
you would think that at least would have been able to.
The Dutch managed to keep their whole country out of the water, and we can't figure out how to be resilient and do this for one city at the mouth of the Mississippi.
And why is that?
I don't. Well, I mean, see The Wire, e.g. The Wire. I mean, the Wire is about the end of empire, and I do believe that we are at the point where we can't get anything right anymore. I mean, we're fairly rigorous about not paying the cost.
A very wise man I know said to me, I hear all this talk about America not being respected, and he said, it's not that. People worry about America's competence.
Exactly.
That's your point.
Yeah, that's the fundamental point, is that, we don't mind if we don't win the drug war. We don't mind if we don't keep New Orleans out of the Gulf of Mexico. We don't mind if we don't contribute to a solution of global warming. We are about what happened yesterday and about what might happen tomorrow, maybe. But the next week and the week after that...
our own power and our own celebrity and our own whatever.
We are as distracted a society as you could imagine, and I don't see it getting any better. You look at what we are paying attention to, it's sort of remarkable. I hope to be wrong about all this. If The Wire is not prescient about anything, if you pull it off a shelf 10 years from now, and it was a pessimistic version of the future that had no basis in reality, nobody will be more happy than me. I live in Baltimore. I'm part of this American experiment.
So, but the idea of the Wire is the institutions are failing us.
Absolutely,
Across the board.
And that we are failing each other. That the American collective is coming apart at the seams, and that we are a country that the can-do myth of America, whether it was the parts of it that were true and the parts of it that were myth, they're now all being exposed as something of a fraud, and it's shocking to me. It's shocking what we're not able to get done.
If I was HBO and I was listening to hear what you're saying now, I realize that your talents are best spent on Generation Kill and on the name. If I was at HBO right now, I'd be seeing you on this show. I'd pick up the phone and I would call you and I'd say, make sure New Orleans is on track, but I want you to go and write an essay on America and where we are. I want you to do it. I want you to seek out the voices that speak to you as the voice of truth, and speak truth to power, and go do it.
But you know what?
Remember the days you were a reporter, and now you have an additional pen to write with, which is a camera.
I found there's something funny about that, which is that if I write it in my own voice, I become just another talking head arguing over it. And I marginalize myself in a way. I wrote a couple of pieces. The last season of The Wire had to do with journalism and the tragedy that is now newspapering in this country. And I wrote a couple pieces which were as impassioned as anything I could think of, and they represented exactly what I thought. And I remember reading on a blog site, somebody said, well, they were sick of it. It was lecturing in a way. It was, it fell back to who the hell is he to tell us, this guy got out 10 years ago, and it comes to the ad hominem. The really cool thing about film and about telling stories through the other characterizations is that you avoid the ad hominem.
No, but you misunderstand me, or maybe not. What I'm saying, is not you're saying this is all these things I believe, but take what you think is truth and go find people that express that in a way. That's what I'm saying, but real people about a real place, us.
There is an argument, which is when you obscure it a little bit behind storytelling, you might not have to preach just to the choir that agrees with you.
See, I don't believe you'll necessarily have to preach to the choir. I mean, I don't want you not to do things because you have faulty assumptions about...
About the audience?
Yes.
You know what? Generation Kill...
You're going to slap me down there, aren't you?
Generation Kill is out there now.
Yeah.
And liberals are arguing that these Marines are crude and homophobic, and they say nasty things, and sometimes they shoot at the wrong targets, and they seem unprofessional. And conservatives are saying we didn't make them look honorable.
You know what? You are terrible, David. You know what? You listen to these people too much. Just follow your own instincts. Quit listening to people and what they say about you.
But I did follow the instincts in making the film.
Right.
I made the film I wanted to make.
Okay, fine. Man, don't worry about what people are saying.
But I'm saying we are protected in the sense of we're able to make the story and we're able to use the truth and depict the truth in a careful way without me extending myself and saying, here's David Simon's view of the world. That's a vulnerable thing. The moment you do that, you enter into the realm of the political. And when I look at the political in this country, it's like Democrat, Republican, liberal, a plague on all their houses. The partisanship.
I'm not trying to elect David Simon president. All I'm trying to do, or get him a Pulitzer Prize, or any of that. All I'm trying to do, I think he has a certain gift. And, and you keep creating what I think are false, impediments, which are not there. I mean, there's a story to be told, and I hope somebody will step forward, because you obviously are not. Except in all the great work you're doing with Generation Kill and New Orleans.
I think we're biting off pieces as fast as we can.
Okay, fair enough.
But I mean, is there okay. You've got a story in your head that I'm not getting near. And
no, the story in my head is you have a great sense of where America is and what the challenge ought to be. And you ought to find those people who embody that and who have that voice and put them together in a very strong narrative.
Okay. I'm going to take that.
I'm
going to take that home. I'm going to take that home with. I'm going to think about that.
All right, good. So tell me what you want people to walk away with from this 7-episode series.
Well, it's subtle. The one thing, I guess, job one is, I would like them to contemplate, on some level, the idea that there are Americans fighting a war. That seems really simple, and yet, I think this country, emotionally, psychically, financially, has opted out of this war in the most profound way. Not the military community, but that's a small subset of America. And because this is a volunteer military, most of us are going on with our lives as if there is not a war. In fact,
because we haven't had to make any sacrifice.
Absolutely not. Not emotionally, not financially. We're not even paying for the war, as it should fundamentally be paid for by taxes. We are acting as if we are at peace. And a small segment of America is not at peace. And if Americans could be made to reconnect with this war on any level through the depiction of these Marines and what they do and what they've gone through, that's job one. Down the road, if you watch all 7 episodes, a lot of the fundamental misapprehensions about Iraq that would plague us for the next 5 years actually come to pass in those first weeks. You start seeing the rise of the jihad. You start seeing the lack of a plan for the occupation. You start seeing fundamental problems within the military structure, but they take time. I mean, it's I think, and I want them to only be experienced as these Marines experience them. It's not fair for me to graft on my opinions about the war, or Ed Burns or Evan Wright. We were pretty rigid about, look, if it didn't come up and if they didn't say it and if they didn't argue over it at the time, contemporaneous, then it can't be in there.
And remember, this were words written by a reporter who was embedded, who was listening to them in their language every day.
It's their language. It's funny, because a lot of the people who have jumped on a certain line here, they're, why would the Marines say that? That's political. They, Colbert said, vote Republican. He yelled it out of the Humvee window to Iraqi civilians. It's not a line that I would dare invoke for myself, but Brad Colbert, sergeant in the lead vehicle, he threw that one out there, so it's in the movie. It would be nice if we were reflective of where we were and the naivete with which we prosecuted this war, which is not to say that we're not in it now, or that there can't be arguments back and forth about how to get out or what's necessary for the future. But I do get a sense of we're not particularly reflective as a country about how we got into this war. And maybe that revisiting of it and seeing some of those scales fall away from these Marines, from their eyes, that might be a helpful thing.
So tell me, what is your take on this? Was it an appropriate mission, badly executed at some point? Things that you say you get into near the fifth or sixth or seventh episode of Generation Kill, or was? Yeah,
I see what you're saying. It's brilliantly executed as a active maneuver warfare. I mean, that we toppled that government in a matter of weeks. Iraqi military was flanked and made irrelevant, on a daily basis, and the capital was taken in a record amount of time with minimum casualties. What to do with the country once we had it? There was no level of coherence to the American plan, and Evan's book begins to show that process, and of course other journalism, Emerald City and some other fine books, have shown just how profound our misconceptions were.
Emerald City was a great book. I think did he win a Pulitzer for that or not? I don't know.
I don't know if he did or not, but Pulitzer aside, it's a great book.
It doesn't make it any less good as a book. But your take on this is, in the end, that going in there and toppling Saddam Hussein is okay, but if you're going to do that, be wise about what you're undertaking, and be wise about where you're going, and be wise about what it's going to take, and be wise about the culture of the place you are, and be wise about what could go wrong?
Well, I would say all those things. The preamble about it being okay to, in my heart of hearts, I think personally, and I didn't reflect this in the film.
No, you said that.
But personally, I think it was the wrong war at the wrong time. But apart from that, if other people thought it was the right war at the right time, I would have felt a lot better if they'd done a better job of planning it and planning the aftermath of the war, yes. And then the other thing is I would feel a little more comfortable about our war-making capacity as a superpower if Americans were aware, as they might be if they watched Generation Kill, that war is not a smart bomb hitting the right target all the time, or even enough of the time for us to feel good about it. War is not discreet. It's not pristine. A lot of civilians get killed in Generation Kill by Marines who are trying their damnedest to hit the right targets. And that's something that I don't think we have any sense of, is the amount of damage that modern warfare does. And you start to see just how lethal the American military is when they're prosecuting a war. And these are guys who are trying to be conscientious, and yet war is war.
Is any part of this story you think hasn't been covered by the American working press?
I don't think you've seen the dynamic of an American military invasion yet.
That's what you get here in a fictionalized version of a real story.
I think there's been some good journalism. I think there's been some good narrative journalism even. I don't think there's been any. I don't think it's penetrated the American consciousness, and I don't think it's been consistent. And I think a lot of it has been from the point of view of journalists who have not who bought in. And one of the things about Evan was he didn't write a word until he got home, which I think transformed his journalism, because what you wrote when you were embedded and the guy sitting next to you was going to be able to download it the next day. These guys could get access to what you were writing. If you're relying on the guy in the turret to keep you safe while you're riding towards Baghdad, you're going to write about him differently. Whereas Evan, while I think he was very respectful of these Marines and very good with his journalism, he nonetheless didn't start writing this book until he was back in the States. Different kind of journalism.
There's much to talk about in another show, another time, about the future of newspapers and so many other things. I hope, and I think this is one of your great, you love the quote from H.L. Mencken, which is, "As I look back over a misspent life, I find myself more and more convinced that I had more fun doing news reporting than in any other enterprise. It really is the life of kings."
It was. It was. Man, they screwed it up. But yeah, it was for a brief time. And I caught the tail end of it. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. But yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thanks.
Generation Kill, 7 episodes, can be seen on Sunday nights at 9 on HBO. The Wire seasons 1 through 4 are available on DVD. It is the craft of telling a story, as good as it gets. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.